Something else I wanted to discuss with you. I talked about how you're an American in Japan and have lived there for many years, but obviously with everything that's going on in the world right now,
Hmm.
I kind of wanted to get your perspective. What is it like under quarantine in Japan? Or are you even under quarantine? I don't even know what the status is there.
Yeah, it's really interesting. We were, as everybody knows, the coronavirus started in China, although China seems to be spinning a different story these days. But it started in China, as far as we know, and then people were getting very, very sick, and that's not too far from us. And Japan being so close and being a popular, in the last 4 or 5 years, has become a hugely popular tourist destination for Chinese. They just love it here, and they come in droves. And so people were quite worried about infection over here, and that was before we knew anything about the virus. And so, and then people started to get sick here in dribs, just a few. There weren't that many, but everybody was worried about what might happen, so they grew more cautious. But fortunately, so there was fortunately, people here wear masks a lot anyways. When hay fever season comes, people with hay fever wear masks. If you've got a cold, particularly in Tokyo or the bigger metropolitan areas, people will wear masks because out of courtesy not to, because they get on these tight packed trains for a commute. And if they sneeze and stuff,
Mm.
you're going to affect 10 other people. So they'll wear a mask. So they have that custom here. So it was very easy for them to adapt to the idea of wearing masks when it became necessary for the virus to keep yourself from getting infected,
Mm.
not to mention spreading it. So because of that, and because they're not a hugely touchy-feely, hugging type of people, the virus hasn't spread as fast here. And because the Japanese government was really quick to cancel big events, sporting, they were maybe the first one before Europe and before anywhere. I mean, they canceled. They were reluctantly they did. Baseball season was just starting. There's sumo and there's soccer was already on. Professional events, and initially they made everybody wear masks to go into the arenas, and if they didn't have a mask, they gave them a mask, right? Because
Mm.
you're sitting, so close together to the other people, and there's people above you and there's people below you, and people did it willingly. But they did it. They did that for a week or two, and then they just said, "No, we got to cancel this," and they did, and that kept the numbers down. So the reaction was swift. Not There were some bumbling, but it was swift, and it was done very early. Uh, the government moved early. People moved early to protect themselves, and so because of that, the numbers have been very low here.
So
Despite
have there been actual stay-at-home orders in Japan, or is it?
that's interesting because we had after the U.S. was very moved. I hate to say it, my own country moved really slow, and even though they had all this evidence, they didn't do anything for the longest time. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of people got sick and a lot of people died that would not have died if they had just moved earlier because all the evidence was there. But here, because of World War II, and when the government was too strong, it was led by the military, and it was too strong and too dominating. It just controlled the people's lives, every aspect of the people's lives. There were thought police and regular police and all kinds of things. So much so that after the war, there was a new constitution. And in a new constitution, that restricted what the government can do by quite a bit. And
Mm.
that constitution still rules for the most part. So the government doesn't actually have the power to tell people they need to go into lockdown. They can suggest it.
Mm.
So that's what they did. Eventually, they suggested a soft. So we had what was called a soft lockdown, and a voluntarily restaurants and everything else. They said that vital places like supermarkets and hospitals and pharmacies needed to stay open, but for the rest of the places, it was up to them whether they shut down or not. A lot of restaurants went to takeout. Everywhere you go, there are, alcohol spray bottles,
Oh yeah, yeah.
right? And then they
Sanitizer.
started blocking off tables. So like you go into if you went into a restaurant, for the most part, places stayed open. But if you go into a restaurant, they would block. They had every other table sort of taped or blocked off so that you sat uh, quite a distance from everybody else. And everybody was careful, and they wore masks. And I remember walking into one place, and there weren't very many people in it, which was a good thing. And there was a table there that hadn't been there before, and on top was a bottle. I didn't even notice it and then they wouldn't let me in. Well, the waitress, before she sat me, it was just a really regular coffee shop, said, would you mind using the alcohol spray to sterilize your hands? So that kind of thing. So because of those things that they did very quickly, it really hasn't. I think we're up for the whole country. We're up to about 15,000 cases of people infection, just 15,000. And so it's interesting. And with the latest thing, I don't know if this has happened in the States. The latest thing is now there's a sheet of plastic between cashiers and customers. When you go up to a register to pay, they've got a sheet of plastic that comes down, right? They're wearing a mask, and you're usually wearing a mask, but they've got a sheet of plastic too to keep.
I've actually noticed several places that we went to with a plexiglass, like where they've installed we went to McDonald's drive-through, and they're plexiglassed off, and they've just got a little slit.
Yeah, like a bank, where they keep
like a bank. Yeah.
And they have that too. In some places they have the plexiglass. A lot of places just thick plastic sheets coming down from the ceiling or something. Yeah. So they've been pretty good about it. The government's been kind of bumbling around, but overall, people have been pretty good about it, and there's a lot of news on the TV all the time. From the early days, there was, all day long, there was announcements and things like that. So people were aware. And so that's saved. I mean, Japan's population is pretty big. It's a third the size of the U.S. population. So it's very easy to extrapolate, right? And we only have 15,000 cases at this point.
Wow.
And
that's crazy.
Yeah. So we've been quite fortunate that way. But hopefully it'll continue. Everybody's basically in stasis until some sort of vaccine comes along.
Right. Yeah, and I think, it sounds like people there really took it seriously. I think that's something that we here in the U.S., something that caused the spread, is that there were so many people that just didn't take it seriously. When they first started, and we're saying stay at home, stay away from people, people were, it's not going to affect me. I'm not going to, and we saw a lot of that kind of, just really selfish kind of thinking from people. So hopefully, as we're moving forward, we're seeing a lot of stuff reopening here, and I'm really hoping that we don't get a second.
Resurgence, right? Yeah, a lot of people took it seriously here, but a lot of people didn't, frankly, and a number of the people started to get sick, and then what's happened in every country? One or two famous people get sick, really sick, and some of them, unfortunately, die, and that seems to wake up a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. Well, I said from the beginning, Tom Hanks got sick. If Tom Hanks would have, and that was pretty early, I think that was March, when it first came out. And if Tom Hanks would have got it and something would have happened to him, God forbid that Tom Hanks, something would happen, but I think people would have had a whole different outlook.
Yeah, well, I think
they would have taken it a lot more seriously.
One of my favorite singer-songwriters, John Prine, died early on. I don't know if you know who he is, but you've got all the guitars there in the background. He's John Prine. He was a great he's a unique singer unto himself. It wasn't quite somewhere in the middle between rock and folk and country, right? Somewhere in the middle there. He was his own, and he passed away. Unfortunately, he hung in there for about 10, 12 days in intensive care, but he was seven. I think he was in his 70s, and then
Mhm.
and he'd had 2 bouts with cancer that he survived, and it was just too much. So that was a big shocker for everybody in the music world. I'm sure about that, and any number of people who knew him. So those kind of events seem to, and the Tom Hanks items made people look up and take a little more notice, take it a
Mhm.
little seriously. Yeah, but hopefully this is, the world and the way of doing things are going to change a little bit. There's going to be a shift in the way we do things, and in some arenas, but and there'll be improvements too, I think. So
Yeah.
it's an interesting thing. I won't be writing a novel about it, but I'm sure there'll be a number of people writing thriller novels about this kind of thing.
Yeah, I actually just read where post-apocalyptic novels, like nobody's buying those, but the pandemic novels, a lot of people are chasing those right now. So
Well,
yeah, and I'm the same way. Well, number one, I don't even know like how my books. I don't know how I would even do them, as a pandemic. I don't know that. I guess it kind of you do the whole thing like you're trapped in your house, but I don't know. It just seems kind of you know. Um,
yeah, it's interesting to think about, but
silly.
I won't be doing. There's so much in the news and there's so much coverage. You kind of feel that everything's been done, and there's not a lot new you can write about in a thriller. There are other avenues to explore, which is the direction I'll
Well,
go.
and there actually is. I'm talking right now with another writer about doing a co-authoring type thing, and something we've discussed is having a pandemic in the past that actually is part of the backstory. Where we get to tie in a few of those things, but just subtly, kind of touch on the topics of the day, but without.
Not quite post.
Yeah, it really is not a driving force of anything we're going to be doing. It's just kind of, was there in the background and has influenced the world
Yeah.
that the novel is set in. So,
Yeah.
and I think that like you said, this is going to change our world, and hopefully for the better. I said from the beginning, uh, you know, hopefully this opens up people's eyes to the fact that there are, something like this can happen, and we can, this is comparatively, it could have been a lot worse. We could have had a lot higher percentage of death rate with the virus, and I think it's, hopefully this prepares us in our thinking and our infrastructure and things to where when something actually happens, where a virus comes out that kills 15 or 20% of everyone who gets it, that we have things in place where we can actually stop that spread.
Yeah,
That's
I mean, we've had incidents before, and it's kind of interesting to think about them. I mean, there were SARS, and there's been various outbreaks of Ebola, and of course there was AIDS. Somebody pointed out to me the other day, which is slightly different, but still.
yeah.
And all those unfolded a little bit slowly. This unfolded so quickly, and it's so contagious. It caught a lot of people off guard.
Hmm.
And I remember thinking, I don't know who was president. When Obama was president, there was an outbreak, a rather serious outbreak of Ebola in Africa somewhere, and he jumped on it very quickly and sent money and experts down there and stuff. And I thought, well, why is he doing that? It's so far away and all that. But now I understand
Yeah.
exactly. He was trying to keep it out of the U.S. and out of any place else, and so he and his people jumped on it very, very quickly to kind of suppress it in place. And and in hindsight, I mean, he probably had a lot of good advisors around him who were telling him, what the potential is. From my point of view, and the average person's point of view, you don't think that far ahead. But
Yeah.
now this sort of thing has come into the popular consciousness, and so it's going to change a lot of things. And everybody has to put things on hold temporarily, and hopefully that's just temporarily. I feel sorry for kids who are graduating now. They're sort of stuck, and then other people they're stuck temporarily. So I urge you all, if any of you are listening to this, to find good things to do with your job, with yourself, and think of the future. And it's not forever. And
Yeah. Yeah, I actually have our daughter graduated from college during
Oh,
all
there you
this.
go.
So yeah, she was sitting on the couch one day, and she shows me a thing. She's like, "Well, here's my graduation," and it was like Facebook, and they had
Yeah,
her name pops up, and she's like, "That's it,"
yeah,
summa cum laude, you know. But it's just
yeah.
it definitely kind of takes away, and I think college maybe isn't your college graduation, but definitely high school.
Sure, sure.
I remember that being a really big deal when you were that age. So I definitely feel for all the kids that are
Yeah, I did too. I really
missing
do.
out on
And
that. But at the same time, you know,
yeah,
in the grand scheme of things, you gotta take it in perspective, and we're all kind of
play
we're all
the
making
cards as
sacrifices.
they're dealt,
Yeah.
and think about the future. The other thing that's funny is that what's funny if you ask people, well, what are they doing, and so a lot of people I know are doing things that they've been meaning to do for years. Now that they're stuck at home, they have to do them. They want to do them, and so that's
Yeah.
kind of the upside. A small upside. You know, there's things that you've been meaning to do for ages and ages. And you're just so busy, and now you have a little bit more time, and so those are getting done. So that's
Mhm.
kind of. We drove out to a home center around here, kind of, and it was I couldn't believe it. I hadn't been to that. I go to a home center maybe once or twice a year, sort of place like Lowe's or
Mhm.
Home Depot. Um, I might go once or twice a year at most. And I drove out there, and there was a line to get into the parking lot, and there were guards directing traffic. There were so many people that were, had suddenly had a lot of time on their hands. That's where they all were. And inside the home center it was a madhouse. It was just crazy.
Wow.
So um, fortunately, people were, very cautious, and everybody was wearing masks, so it was helpful. But it was a little bit unsettling to see so many people after wandering around. And Tokyo, which has the greater Tokyo area, including the commute people, has 36 million people, right? 36 million people in the greater Tokyo area. And
Wow.
it looks like a ghost town now, right? Now things are reopening up bit by bit, but and so it's a little more lively, but people are being cautious. So
Yeah.
anyways, probably enough of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, before we go, just one more thing. Are there any? We probably a lot of people out there who are watching this who are aspiring writers, who are people who want to get into writing. What do you have any advice for the next generation that you'd like to impart?
Um, just a couple of things. If you want to write, start writing and do something every day. This is what I tell everybody: do something every day. When you start to get a focus on a project, a book, and you're writing, uh, and you get serious, whether you've got a contract or whether it's your first outing, try and do something every day. Whether even if as busy as you are in your life, I see so many people who put it off and put it off, and years pass, and they've got like 3 pages, right?
Mm.
And they've done nothing, and then they get very they have all these regrets and things like that. I think if you're serious, try and do something every day, even if it's only 5 minutes. A lot of people try to find the perfect time to set up, the perfect quiet time to. I did this too, which is why I know. And the perfect quiet time to sit down and write for a couple hours, and then if you can't find that, then you get frustrated. But my point is to just do something anyplace, anytime you can, even if it's take notes, write a couple lines, read a book that you want to read parts of a book. Do something every day and write a few lines every day if that's all you have time for. Don't wait for the perfect time and when you can block out a huge chunk of time. Just start.
Mm.
Because everybody's efforts, I don't care how good you are, and I've talked to a lot of very good authors, and they say the same thing. Your first efforts are your first efforts, and it's in the process later as you go through and you edit and you rewrite and polish that things get better. So just get something down and keep going. Just plow ahead, step
Mm.
by step. That's the thing.
Yeah, I kind of makes me think of something I was recently did the master class, Neil Gaiman's master class, and I think he's a really interesting guy and had some really interesting points. Um, and something that he had commented over the course of that was that when he looks back on his books, he can't tell the difference between the parts where he was really struggling and pushing to, like, every word was a struggle, and the parts that flowed together. Like when he reads them, they're all pretty
That's
much
true. Yeah.
pretty much the same. I mean, there's not like, I mean, maybe they're okay. This is, it was going really well, and so this is a little better or whatever. But the level is not near as, it's pretty much, if you're pushing forward, you're pushing forward. You're getting it done. And I think
Yeah, I found the same thing to be true. I mean, things that I thought were terrible and I really had to work hard, and some of them are, and you later decide to re-edit them or whatever. But in the end, some stuff comes magically, and you don't know why or how, and it just comes there, and most of that works out okay. Some of it doesn't, and then some stuff you really have to struggle to work with to get out. But in the end, it's all kind of seamless when you get to that point where you've got your final book, whether it's published or not. The other thing that people don't realize is that there's a lot. I mean, I should have known this, but on my first book, there's so much that you have to know and that you don't know when you sit down to write a book. I knew nothing about women's clothing except for any details really about what's a good outfit or anything like that, or the makeup and stuff like that. But when you start to write a book and you need characters, you have to talk about these things, and so you find out you don't know anything. And so sometimes those sections were a little bit of struggle the first or second time you do them. And then you're talking about a cityscape very well, and then maybe your character's out in the countryside. Well, that's a whole completely different setting, and you've got to write about a completely different atmosphere, and you've got trees and forests and farmers and tractors, and each setting is different, right? And then you take somebody to a foreign territory or an embassy or something like that, and spy across the table. My characters go to North Korea or go to the DMZ.
Mm.
When I went there, and I spent 2 days there along the DMZ, fascinating area, by the way. And but once I was there and whatever, but you're in one single book, you're actually, if you think about it, writing about any number of different topics, and it all has to come to it will all eventually come together seamlessly. But usually there are things and there are always going to be things you don't know, and so sometimes those come harder. And it works the other way around too. If you know something too well and you're too close, you tend to write too much, and so you need to pull yourself back.
Yeah, tend to put in too much detail.
Balance to everything. It just takes time. So that's why I say just write, because it takes time to find your voice and your perspective and your style and your pacing, and that all that comes together to form a balance and your storytelling technique. And just keep plowing along, and there are all those elements that have to come together, and they will come together if you're persistent. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think that kind of what you're saying mirrors something that is one of my favorite writing quotes. It was from Stephen King, and in his book on writing, and he says in order to be a good writer, or a writer of any substance, you need to do two things. You need to write a lot and read a lot, and that's pretty much
Yeah,
it.
I think that's very, very true. Yeah, I mean, everybody asks, well, and it's true. I ended up being a literature major or English major, whatever you want to call it, but I sort of fell into that as a kind of at the end. But you don't need that at all. They always say that go out and study anything else, because you don't really need that. And it's true. It's absolutely true. Better to study journalism or study science or anthropology, because that'll give you color and background for something else. And the reading and the writing on your own is plenty. Yeah. And experience. I mean, and get out and do things, because that becomes a part of yourself, becomes a part of your world and your awareness, for lack of a better word. And it shows up in your writing one way or another.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the I always tend to find that writers who write the best books are also usually people who have done interesting things, who have lived interesting lives, or had interesting previous professions, or have, or have are just interested in things like that and really dive into those subjects. It's I think if you are really want to do it, that's the way you kind of have to, rather than just scratching the surface of a basic plot. You kind of have to dig in and dig your heels into the more esoteric uh, aspects of writing.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that people who are in the world and part of the world and active, whether they're writing nonfiction or fiction, um, tend to produce the better books. Right?
Mm-hmm.
They're not stay at home. But there's no one rule or one pattern. That's the other thing.
Yeah,
Some people with active imaginations, perfectly happy just sitting at home. And so there's no one absolute rule or everything. Anything goes. Anything is possible. Every life is different. Everybody has a voice.
yeah,
Trick is to find it. Right?
yeah. The first rule is there are no rules. If it works, it works. I
Yeah.
mean, that's the how many times have you picked up a hugely best-selling book and read it, and then there's like he head hops, or you know something changes. I'm the one that
You
comes to
break the
mind is,
cardinal rule.
yeah, he breaks the cardinal rule. Like, actually, what I'm thinking of is Hannibal with Thomas Harris. I think he actually changes. I think he goes to like second person during one section, and then switches back, and just things that there are so many times I look at some of those things and go, there's no way they'd let me get away with this. There's no way that my editor would let this fly. But some people can just make it work.
Yeah, I mean, every so often, every 5 or 10 years, a book comes along that's completely different and opens up a whole new subgenre. Whether it's fiction or thriller writing or writing, or nonfiction. And can you ever remember a time when there weren't any legal thrillers?
Hmm.
No, you can't. But there was a time when there wasn't. Before Grisham and Scott Turow, who both published their first books about the same time, just by coincidence. I think before that time, there wasn't any such thing as a legal thriller. I mean, there had been a book or two where there might have been a lawyer involved. I mean, famously To Kill a Mockingbird, but nobody considers that a legal thriller. And
12
so,
Angry Men, that kind of thing.
right. So these books come along, and people and authors and people. So you have Presumed Innocent and John Grisham's first book, his first big seller, which is I think his second book. But they come along at the same time, and they create a whole new section. It's as if a whole new continent pops up out of the water. There's territory there that was never there before, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we see that happening all the time. I mean, Dan Brown did it with his thriller as well. He sort of raised the bar, whether you're a fan of his writing style or not. He raised the bar. Thomas Harris, Red Dragon, was like the first, the first, what do you call it, serial killer sort of.
Yeah.
I mean, and there was magic in that book. And now you go back and read it now. I went back and read it the other day, and it seems sort of cliche, right? But the thing is that he was the originator. Everybody's copied what he did in that book. And so he was the originator, and you don't know that when you start looking at the dates, sort of lining things up.
That's like when somebody's saying, when the John Carter movie came out, everybody was saying, "Oh, it ripped off Star Wars," and you're like, "No, Edgar Rice Burroughs wrote this like in the 1800s. It didn't rip off Star Wars." Like this is the old school stuff that you don't realize. But that's something too that like I found kids today, like if they're not familiar with something and you go back and watch it now, they'll go, "Oh, that was okay," but I've seen how many, and you have to kind of stop and go, yes, but this is the movie that started all those other movies that you've seen are just copying this movie.
Well, they've built on it, and some of the good ones have expanded on it. But I guess there's that as well. So you can build on something that's come before, and we're all. And the thing is that you have to do whatever area you're working in fiction. I mean, you want to be original, but at the same time, you have to. One of the most interesting things, an editor, a fellow editor, said to me, who was a few years older, who was a lot older than me, actually, said, and he was very clever. He was a Japanese editor, actually, and he was very clever at picking manuscripts up, and so he was one of the few people who could pick up a manuscript and make a bestseller out of it. And he didn't make a bestseller out of it. He knew what made a bestseller, whether it was fiction. He did mostly nonfiction. He didn't do much fiction. He did some, but he had a great batting average for picking up manuscripts that became bestsellers. And we were talking about it one time. I said, well, how do you do that? And he says, well, the one thing he wants to sense in the book that whatever they're doing, they're not just giving 100%. They're giving 110% or 20%. They're doing a lot more than everything that's been done to this point. Right? And that's not the only thing he looks for, but that's one vital thing he felt the book needed to have. Right? And that's because as a collective, writers, all over the world, people are writing, books come out, and the topics and the genres shift, and they improve, and they go in various directions, and it is a kind of a building up, right? So, and then every once in a while, somebody comes up with something completely different, and sometimes that creates a whole new subgenre. I mean, Gone Girl did that, right?
Well, yeah, and cross genre, when you have kind of combine genres to make something that's
right. Yeah, that happened then. And then she had the unfaithful narrator, which hundreds of years ago, apparently they had those as well. And they've had them over the years, but the way she did it, and with several points of view, was it? And things like that. So those kind of books pop up, and then a whole new areas. So there's always things. So you can write an original, which is harder, but and to circle back to what we were talking about before, there are no rules. Anything is possible if you can create it and make it whole.
Yeah, and that's I feel the same way about music. A lot of people, you'll find musicians who will feel that certain techniques or certain tools are cheating, and I've always said, there's no such thing as cheating in music. It's about the song and what sound comes out at the end, and if it's a good, if it's a good song and it sounds good and people like it, it doesn't matter how you made those sounds. It doesn't matter to me whether you were using a synthesizer or playing it on a, upright bass. It doesn't really matter. It's more about the finished product.
Right. Yeah. I agree with that. Yeah.
Well, I think we've had a really great discussion here about a lot of things, and had a great time talking with you, Barry. Hopefully we will see each other definitely at next Thriller Fest, or hopefully maybe we'll BoucherCon or one of the other things that are going on will actually, whether those actually happen or not, we'll see. But hopefully we'll see each other before next year at Thriller Fest. But if not, it's been really great talking to you, and I thank you so much. Everybody out there, you can check out Barry at barrylancet.com.
A very original website address, right? All right. Thanks, Ethan. Thanks for everything.